I decided to bring lunch to my wife at her volunteer work at the animal shelter. When I arrived, the manager said, "We don't have anyone by that name volunteering here. Never have." She'd been gone every Saturday for 2 years, so I decided to follow her next weekend. The woman behind the desk at Riverside Animal Rescue looked at me like I'd just asked her to explain quantum physics. "I'm sorry," she said, adjusting her glasses, "but we don't have any volunteer by that name. I've been managing this facility for 8 years, and I personally oversee all volunteer applications." She pulled up a spreadsheet on her computer, scrolling through what must have been hundreds of names. My wife's wasn't there, had never been there. I was standing in the lobby with a takeout bag from her favorite Thai place, spring rolls getting cold, while my entire marriage collapsed around me like a house built on sand. The woman, her name tag read Deborah Kemp, Facility Director, kept talking, something about how I could fill out an application if I wanted to volunteer myself, but her words became static. White noise. Because Lindsay had been leaving our house every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. for the past 2 years, wearing old jeans and a shelter t-shirt I'd never actually seen her come home in, talking about puppies and adoption events and the sweet senior cat she was trying to socialize. All of it was a lie. I'd been married to Lindsay for 6 years when I decided to surprise her that morning. We'd met at a mutual friend's wedding, one of those storybook moments where I spilled champagne on her dress and spent the rest of the night apologizing, and somehow she'd found it endearing instead of catastrophic. She worked as a dental hygienist at a practice downtown, reliable schedule, good benefits, the kind of steady life we'd both wanted after chaotic childhoods. I was a project manager for a commercial construction firm, traveling occasionally but mostly local work. We had a modest house in the suburbs, a Subaru that ran well, and plans for kids once we'd saved a bit more. Normal, stable, or so I thought. The volunteer work had started in the spring 2 years ago. She'd mentioned wanting to give back, to do something meaningful with her weekends, and I'd encouraged it. Thought it was sweet. Every Saturday she'd leave around 9 and come home by 3 or 4, sometimes with stories about difficult adoptions or animals with behavioral issues, and I'd never once questioned it. Why would I? Looking back now, there were details that should have stood out. She never smelled like animals when she came home, not even faintly. No fur on her clothes, no scratches on her hands despite claiming she worked with cats. She'd mentioned a few volunteer names over the months, Rachel, David, someone named Autumn, but when I'd suggested we attend one of the adoption events together, she'd always had a reason why I couldn't come. They had enough volunteers that day. It would be too crowded. She wanted to keep her volunteer work separate from our home life, a thing that was just hers. I'd respected that boundary. Hell, I'd admired it. I thought it showed healthy independence in our marriage, the kind of space couples needed to maintain their individual identities. Every red flag I'd ignored wasn't just a missed warning, it was a choice I'd made to trust her, to believe the woman I'd married was exactly who she claimed to be. The cognitive dissonance was physically painful, like my brain was trying to hold two incompatible truths at the same time and threatening to short-circuit from the effort. I drove home in a fog, the Thai food still sitting in the passenger seat, the smell making me nauseous. It was a Wednesday afternoon, middle of the work week, and I'd taken a long lunch specifically to do this surprise. Lindsay was at work. She wouldn't be home for 3 more hours. I sat in our driveway for 20 minutes, engine off, staring at our house like it belonged to strangers. The flower boxes she'd insisted on installing last summer. The welcome mat she'd picked out because it said, "Come back with tacos." Every detail was a piece of the life I thought we'd built together, and now all of it felt like set dressing for an elaborate performance I'd been too stupid to recognize. When I finally went inside, I didn't know what to do with myself. I couldn't call her, couldn't confront her yet. Not until I knew what I was confronting her about. So I did the only thing I could think of. I started looking for evidence. I wasn't proud of it, wasn't the kind of husband who snooped, but the rules had changed the moment that shelter director told me my wife had never set foot in her building. Her home office was tidy, organized, exactly like Lindsay kept everything. Color-coded files for bills, medical records, tax documents. I went through each one methodically, looking for anything that seemed out of place. Bank statements showed our normal expenses, groceries, utilities, her car payment, my student loans. Nothing unusual. No large withdrawals, no mysterious charges. I checked her email on our shared desktop computer, but her inbox was mostly work-related messages from the dental office, some promotional emails, a thread with her sister about their mom's upcoming birthday. I felt like a detective in a bad movie, searching for the hidden clue that would make everything make sense. But there was nothing. Just the normal digital debris of a normal life. Then I remembered her car, the Subaru Outback she drove every Saturday morning. I went to the garage, popped the trunk, and started searching. Underneath the spare tire compartment, tucked into the tire well, was a zippered makeup bag I'd never seen before. Inside, a different driver's license with her photo, but a different name, Lindsay Forrester instead of Lindsay Graham, and an address in a part of the city I'd never been to. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped the license. Forrester. That was her maiden name, the one she'd dropped when we got married. Why would she have a fake ID with her old name? Or was it fake? The address was real, listed on a street in the Riverside district, about 40 minutes away. I took photos of everything with my phone, hands trembling, then carefully put everything back exactly as I'd found it. My mind was racing through possibilities, each one more disturbing than the last. Was she living a double life? Did she have another family? Was she involved in something illegal? The rational part of my brain kept trying to insert reasonable explanations. Maybe it was an old ID she'd forgotten about. Maybe the address was from before we got married. But none of that explained why it was hidden in her car, carefully concealed in a place I'd never think to look. I went back inside and searched every other space she might hide things. The back of her closet, under the bathroom sink, behind books on our shelves. Nothing. Whatever secrets she was keeping them mobile, keeping them in that car that left every Saturday morning. That night at dinner, she was exactly the same as always. She asked about my day, told me about a difficult patient who'd needed 3 attempts to get numb for a filling, laughed at something her coworker had said. I pushed food around my plate and made appropriate noises, but I felt like I was watching her through glass, this woman I thought I knew performing the role of my wife. She mentioned that this Saturday would be a long day at the shelter. They had a big adoption event planned, might not be home until 6. The lie came out of her mouth so smoothly, so practiced, that I wondered how many other lies I'd swallowed over the years without even tasting them. I wanted to reach across the table and shake her, demand the truth, but I knew that would be a mistake. If I confronted her now, she'd just craft another lie, a better one, and I'd never know what was really happening. I needed proof. Real, undeniable proof. So I smiled and said that sounded great, asked if they needed any donations, played the supportive husband role while my insides churned with betrayal and rage. Friday night, I told Lindsay I had to go into the office Saturday morning to deal with a project emergency. She barely reacted, just nodded, and said she'd see me later in the day. I'd already rented a nondescript gray Nissan from an agency across town, paid cash, parked it 3 blocks away. Saturday morning, I woke up before the alarm, watched her go through her routine. Shower, jeans, t-shirt. This one actually said Riverside Animal Rescue on it, which now seemed like a deliberate prop in her performance. She grabbed her purse, keys, called out goodbye, and was gone by 8:50 a.m. I waited 5 minutes, then got in the rental car and followed. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I'd never followed anyone before, wasn't sure I was doing it right, kept too much distance and then not enough, terrified she'd spot me. But she never checked her mirrors, never showed any sign she suspected anything. She drove with the calm confidence of someone who'd made this trip 100 times before. She didn't head toward the animal shelter, not even close. Instead, she took the highway west, then exited into the Riverside district, exactly where that fake license had listed an address. I followed her down residential streets lined with older houses, mature trees, the kind of neighborhood that had probably been nice 30 years ago but had started to show its age. She pulled into the driveway of a small craftsman-style bungalow, painted blue with white trim, flower boxes in the windows. There was a mailbox out front with a name on it, Forrester. She used her keys, her own keys, not knocking or waiting, and walked right in like she owned the place. I parked down the street, partially hidden behind a pickup truck, and waited. My mouth was dry. My hands were still shaking. I had no idea what I was looking at. Was this her property? A rental? Did she have a whole separate life here? A secret house she maintained while pretending to volunteer at an animal shelter? 20 minutes passed. Then a man emerged from the house. Late 50s, gray hair, khaki pants, and a button-down shirt. He walked to his own car, a Lexus SUV, and drove away. I sat there for another hour, watching the house, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to walk up to the front door and confront whoever was inside, but I didn't know what I'd be confronting. Another part wanted to leave, pretend I'd never seen any of this, go back to the comfortable ignorance of Wednesday morning. But I couldn't. Not now. Not when I'd come this far. Around noon, Lindsay came out again, this time with the same man who'd left earlier. Apparently he'd returned while I was spiraling into indecision. They were laughing about something, standing close, his hand on her lower back in a way that was far too familiar. They got into his Lexus together and drove off. I followed. They went to a cafe in a trendy part of town, sat outside at a small table, ordered lunch. I parked where I could see them but stayed in the car. Through the zoom on my phone's camera, I took photos. Dozens of them. The two of them talking, laughing, him reaching across the table to touch her hand, her leaning in like they were sharing secrets. This wasn't a business meeting. This was intimate. This was a relationship. I followed them back to the house. The man left again around 2:30 p.m., and Lindsay stayed inside. At 3:45 p.m., she emerged, got in her Subaru, and drove home. I gave her a 15-minute head start, then returned the rental car and took an Uber back to where I'd left my own vehicle that morning. When I walked into our house at 5:30 p.m., she was in the kitchen making dinner, humming along to music from her phone, looking relaxed and content. "How was the adoption event?" I asked, my voice remarkably steady considering my entire world had shattered. "Oh, it was wonderful," she said, smiling. "We found homes for 6 dogs and 3 cats. There was this adorable beagle mix, 8 years old, and this lovely retired couple fell in love with her. It was so sweet." She continued talking, spinning elaborate details about animals that didn't exist, families she'd never met, while I stood there and listened to every word, cataloging every lie, feeling the rage build behind my sternum like pressure in a shaken bottle. Sunday, I told Lindsay I was going to the gym, then drove back to Riverside. I needed to know who lived in that house, who the man was, what exactly my wife was involved in. I parked down the street again and waited. Around 10 a.m., the man emerged, same gray-haired guy from yesterday, and got his mail from the box. I zoomed in with my phone camera and captured the name on an envelope. Arthur Forrester. Forrester. The same name on the fake ID, the same name on the mailbox. My wife's maiden name. I sat there, my brain trying to process this new information. Was this a relative? Her father? But Lindsay's father had died when she was 15. I'd heard that story multiple times, had comforted her through the anniversary of his death every year. She'd shown me photos of his grave. We'd visited it together. So who was Arthur Forrester? An uncle? A cousin? And why was she spending every Saturday with him while telling me she was volunteering with animals? I drove to a library across town and used their public computer to search for Arthur Forrester. Property records showed he'd owned that house since 1994. He was 58 years old, worked as a financial advisor for a regional investment firm called Waverly Capital Management. Married once, divorced 15 years ago. No other properties listed in his name. I searched for any connection to Lindsay's family, but came up empty. Searched for Lindsay Forrester, found some old social media profiles that appeared to be hers from college, but they'd been abandoned years ago, long before we met. I searched for combinations of Arthur Forrester and dental or hygienist, or anything that might explain how they knew each other. Nothing. They had no obvious connection, except that name, Forrester, and the fact that my wife was secretly spending every Saturday with him, in his house, lying to me about where she was. The more I dug, the less sense it made, until I felt like I was trying to solve a puzzle with pieces from 3 different boxes. Monday morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't focus, couldn't pretend everything was normal while my marriage disintegrated around me. I needed answers, needed to understand what was happening, but I didn't know how to get them without tipping my hand. I considered hiring a private investigator, but that felt like an admission that I couldn't handle this myself, that I needed professional help to understand my own wife. Instead, I drove back to Riverside and parked down the street from the house, watching. Arthur left for work at 8:15 a.m., same routine as before. The house sat quiet until 10 a.m., when a cleaning service arrived. 2 women who spent 3 hours inside before leaving. No sign of Lindsay during the week. Whatever her relationship with this house and this man, it seemed confined to Saturdays. I took more photos, documented everything, built a file on my phone that felt like evidence for a trial I didn't want to have. That evening, I did something I'd never done before. I checked Lindsay's text messages while she was in the shower. Her phone was sitting on the kitchen counter, unlocked, and I grabbed it with my heart pounding like I was committing a crime. Most of the messages were exactly what I'd expect. Conversations with her sister, her mom, co-workers, a group chat with friends about planning a girls' night. But there was one thread that made my blood run cold. A contact labeled AF. The messages were brief, careful, nothing explicitly incriminating, but the tone was wrong. Familiar, intimate. See you Saturday. Can't wait. Last week was perfect. And then, from 3 days ago, love you. Just those 2 words, sitting there on her phone like a bomb waiting to detonate. I took screenshots of everything, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped her phone, then carefully put it back exactly where I'd found it, screen locked, positioned at the same angle. When she came out of the bathroom, smiling and asking what I wanted for dinner, I wanted to scream. Instead, I said, pasta sounded good. Over the next week, I became someone I didn't recognize. I created a fake social media profile and started following Arthur Forrester's digital presence. He posted occasionally, photos of golf outings, business conferences, articles about financial planning. Nothing suspicious, nothing that explained his connection to my wife. I drove past the house in Riverside multiple times, at different hours, trying to detect any pattern beyond what I already knew. I considered breaking in, searching the place while both of them were gone, but I wasn't ready to become a criminal even if my wife apparently was ready to be a liar. I barely slept, barely ate. Lindsay noticed I was off, asked if I was feeling okay, if something was bothering me at work. I told her I was just stressed about a project deadline, which was easier than saying, I know you're lying to me, but I don't know why. She bought it, or pretended to, and life continued in its strange new normal, where I was living with a stranger who looked exactly like my wife. The following Saturday, I followed her again. Same routine, same house, same man. But this time they left together in the afternoon and drove to a furniture store. I watched from the parking lot as they spent an hour looking at bedroom sets, testing mattresses, discussing options like a couple planning their domestic future together. The casual intimacy of it was somehow worse than anything I'd imagined. This wasn't a brief affair, wasn't a moment of weakness or a mistake being covered up. This was a whole parallel life, complete with shared domesticity and long-term planning. They bought a new bed frame, arranged for delivery, and Arthur paid with his credit card, while Lindsay stood beside him, her hand on his arm, looking at him the way she used to look at me in our early days. I sat in my rental car in that parking lot and felt something inside me break that I didn't think could be repaired. Whatever we'd had, whatever I'd thought our marriage was, it had been a fiction, a performance, and I'd been the only one who didn't know I was watching a play. That Sunday, I couldn't pretend anymore. I needed professional help, needed someone who could make sense of this legally and strategically. I found a lawyer, David Kowalski, family law attorney with 23 years of experience according to his website, and made an appointment for Monday morning. I brought everything: the photos, the screenshots, the fake ID pictures, the documentation of her Saturday absences and lies about the animal shelter. He sat across from me in his office, a room filled with law books and dark wood furniture, and listened without interrupting while I explained the entire situation. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, studying the evidence on his tablet. "Mr. Graham," he finally said, "what you've documented here is certainly evidence of deception, possibly infidelity, but I need you to understand something. If you're considering divorce, this kind of evidence helps, but it's not the smoking gun you might think it is. Courts care more about assets and custody than they do about affairs. That said, there's something strange here that concerns me." He pulled up the photo of the fake ID, the one with her maiden name. "This address," he said, tapping the screen. "The house owned by Arthur Forrester. You said your wife has been using her maiden name there, has what appears to be a driver's license with that name. That's document fraud if the ID is real, which means she went through official channels to obtain it. That's not something people do casually for an affair. That's intentional identity maintenance, which raises a bigger question. Why?" He looked at me with the kind of serious expression that made my stomach drop. "Have you checked your financial accounts recently? Thoroughly? Credit cards, loans, anything in your name that you might not have initiated?" I told him I'd checked our joint accounts, hadn't seen anything unusual, but I hadn't done a deep dive. He recommended I pull my credit report immediately, check for any accounts or activity I didn't recognize. "Sometimes," he said carefully, "when people maintain separate identities like this, it's not just about relationships, it's about assets, access, control." I left his office feeling like I'd graduated from betrayed husband to potential victim of something much darker. I went straight to a coffee shop and pulled my credit report on my laptop, hands sweating as the page loaded. At first, everything looked normal. Our mortgage, my car loan, my student loans, a few credit cards with small balances. But then I scrolled further and found 3 credit cards I'd never opened. 2 were maxed out, $15,000 and $12,000 respectively. The third had a $9,000 balance. Total, $36,000 in debt I didn't know existed, all in my name, all opened over the past 18 months. The addresses on the accounts were unfamiliar, routing to various P.O. boxes in different cities. My vision went dark around the edges. This wasn't just an affair. This was financial fraud, identity theft, and the person who'd done it was my wife, the woman I'd trusted with every aspect of my life, the person who had access to all my personal information because we'd built our lives together, merged our documents and accounts and futures. I called David Kowalski from my car, hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. "You need to file a police report," he said immediately. "Today, right now. This is criminal fraud, and the longer you wait, the harder it becomes to prove you weren't aware of it." He gave me the address for the local precinct and told me to ask for someone in financial crimes. I drove there in a daze, walked into a building I'd never expected to enter as a victim, and met with Detective Reginald Cross, a tired-looking man in his 40s with salt and pepper hair and the kind of patient demeanor that probably came from hearing terrible stories all day long. I showed him everything: the credit report, the fake ID photos, the documentation of Lindsay's lies, the evidence of her alternate identity. He took notes, asked questions, his expression growing more concerned as the scope of the situation became clear. "Mr. Graham," he said when I finished, "I'm going to be straight with you. This isn't just spousal fraud. This is systematic identity theft with what appears to be interstate elements. Those P.O. boxes in different states suggest possible mail fraud, which brings federal jurisdiction into play. I need to involve some colleagues." Within an hour, I was sitting in a different office, this one belonging to Special Agent Lydia Brennan from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. She was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude that should have been intimidating but was actually comforting, because it meant someone was finally taking this seriously. She reviewed everything I'd brought, made phone calls to people whose titles I didn't catch, and then turned to me with an expression I couldn't read. "Mr. Graham, I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Have you ever given your wife permission to use your identity for financial purposes? To open credit cards? To take out loans? Anything like that?" I said no, absolutely not. I'd had no idea any of this existed until today. She nodded like she'd expected that answer. "And this Arthur Forrester? You've never met him? Never heard your wife mention him except as finding these connections yourself?" Again, no. I'd never heard the name until I'd found it on that mailbox, on that fake ID. Agent Brennan explained that what I'd uncovered looked like a possible romance scam with an unusual twist. Typically, romance scammers convince their victims to send money or open credit lines. But this situation was reversed. My wife appeared to be the one with access to funds through the fraudulent accounts, and she was potentially providing those funds to Arthur Forrester for unknown purposes. "We see this sometimes with people running parallel lives," she said. "They maintain their legitimate identity and family, usually for financial stability and cover, while building a second identity where they engage in illegal activity. The fake ID, the second address, the systematic lying. These aren't the behaviors of someone having a simple affair. This is compartmentalization, planning, which means there's likely more we haven't found yet." She asked for permission to access my financial records, to investigate Lindsay and Arthur both, to potentially put surveillance on the house in Riverside. I signed every form she put in front of me. What choice did I have? My wife had stolen my identity, my money, my trust. I wanted to know why. I needed to know why. The FBI moved faster than I expected. Within 3 days, Agent Brennan called to tell me they'd executed a search warrant on Arthur Forrester's house. They'd found extensive documentation of what appeared to be a long-term financial fraud scheme involving multiple victims beyond just me. Arthur, it turned out, wasn't just a financial advisor. He was running an investment scam, convincing people to put money into fake funds that didn't exist, using his legitimate business as cover. And Lindsay wasn't his girlfriend or his accomplice in the traditional sense. She was his daughter. His biological daughter, who he'd maintained a relationship with for her entire life, despite the story she'd told me about him being dead. The fake ID wasn't fake at all. It was her real identity, the one she'd never changed when she got married, because she'd never legally changed her name to Graham. Our marriage license was fraudulent. We'd never actually been married at all because she'd signed it as Lindsay Graham, a name that didn't legally exist. Every document we'd signed together, the mortgage, the credit card applications, everything, had been based on a false identity. I sat in Agent Brennan's office while she explained all of this, my brain struggling to process the scope of the betrayal. "Your wife, though technically she's not your wife, has been working with her father for at least the past 4 years, possibly longer. They've defrauded at least 17 people that we've identified so far, totaling approximately $2.3 million. She would meet potential victims through her job at the dental office, establish trust, get access to their personal information, and then her father would approach them separately with investment opportunities. The victims never connected the two of them because they used different last names and never appeared together in professional contexts. You were different. She married you, or went through the motions of marriage, likely to gain more permanent access to your information and credit. The fact that you work in construction, with connections to property developers and people with significant assets, made you a valuable target. We believe she was planning to introduce you to her father at some point, frame it as a chance meeting, and then convince you to invest in his schemes." The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the desk to steady myself. 4 years, I said. "We've been together for 6 years, so this started roughly 2 years into your relationship," Agent Brennan confirmed, "based on when the first fraudulent accounts were opened in victims' names. Before that, we believe your relationship was genuine, or at least not part of the criminal enterprise. Something changed. Perhaps her father needed help. Perhaps she saw an opportunity. We may never know the exact motivation, but the pattern is clear. She began systematically using your identity and the identities of people connected to you about 4 years ago, and the activity has escalated significantly in the past 2 years, which coincides with when she started her volunteer work cover story." She paused, her expression softening slightly. "I know this is devastating to hear, but you did the right thing by coming forward. Many victims in situations like this are too embarrassed or too attached to see the truth. You're going to help us stop them from hurting anyone else." The next several weeks were a blur of depositions, statements, more searches of the house I'd thought was mine, but turned out to be mortgaged in my name through fraudulent documents. The FBI found evidence that Lindsay and Arthur had been planning to disappear soon, possibly within the next 6 months. They'd been funneling money into offshore accounts, had already established new identities in Costa Rica, were just waiting for a few more investments to mature before they vanished completely, leaving all of us victims holding the debt and the questions. I had to move out of the house. It was being seized as part of the investigation, evidence of the fraud. I moved in with my brother temporarily, sleeping on his couch, trying to rebuild my life from pieces I hadn't realized were counterfeit. My credit was destroyed. My savings were gone. The woman I'd loved had never actually existed. She'd been a character in an elaborate con, and I'd been too trusting, too naive, too convinced of my own judgment to see it. The dental office where Lindsay worked was investigated too. They found that she'd been accessing patient files, stealing information from people who trusted her with their most intimate health details. At least 12 other patients had been victimized, people who'd sat in her chair, mouths open and vulnerable, while she chatted pleasantly and copied down their insurance information, their birth dates, their addresses. The dental practice fired her immediately, of course, but the damage had been done. They were facing lawsuits, potential regulatory action for failing to secure patient data. Everyone she'd touched had been contaminated by her schemes. I felt guilty by association, even though I'd been a victim too, because I'd been sleeping beside her every night, had given her legitimacy through our supposed marriage, had been the proof that she was a normal, trustworthy person with a stable life. The trial happened 8 months after that Wednesday afternoon, when I'd walked into the animal shelter with spring rolls and my world had imploded. Both Lindsay and Arthur were charged with multiple counts of identity theft, wire fraud, mail fraud, and conspiracy. The prosecution had overwhelming evidence: the fake documents, the money trails, testimony from 17 victims, including me. I had to sit in that courtroom and watch the woman I'd loved get let in wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hair pulled back, her face blank of the warmth I'd once thought defined her. She looked at me once during my testimony, just once, and there was nothing there. No apology, no remorse, no recognition of what she'd destroyed. Just cold calculation, like she was assessing whether I was going to be a problem for her defense strategy. Her lawyer argued she'd been manipulated by her father, that she'd been groomed into this life of crime, that she deserved leniency. The jury didn't buy it. Neither did the judge. Arthur Forrester was sentenced to 23 years in federal prison. Lindsay, though I still struggled with what to call her, since the name itself had been part of the lie, received 15 years, with the judge noting that while she might have been influenced by her father initially, she'd been an active, willing participant in the schemes for years, had personally victimized people who trusted her professionally, and had shown no remorse. The restitution order required them to pay back the full $2.3 million plus damages, but since most of the money had already been moved offshore and hidden, the likelihood of any of us victims recovering our losses was minimal. I was told I might eventually get pennies on the dollar after years of legal processes. My $36,000 in fraudulent debt was discharged after months of fighting with credit companies, but my credit score would take years to recover. The house was sold at a loss. I had to start over from scratch, financially and emotionally, at 35 years old. The hardest part wasn't the money or the legal aftermath. It was the fundamental shattering of my ability to trust my own judgment. Every memory was now suspect. Had she ever actually loved me? Or had it all been performance from day one? The sweet moments, the late-night conversations, the plans we'd made for our future. Had any of it been real? Agent Brennan told me that con artists are skilled at creating genuine-seeming emotions, that Lindsay had probably compartmentalized so effectively that she'd believed her own performance sometimes, but that didn't help. I'd built my life on a foundation of lies, and now I had to figure out how to exist in a world where the person who'd known me most intimately had been studying me like a mark the entire time. I started therapy, court-ordered at first, then voluntarily when I realized I needed it. Dr. Helen Ortega, a psychologist who specialized in trauma from financial crimes, helped me understand that I'd been a victim of a sophisticated long-term manipulation, that my failure to see through it didn't make me stupid or weak, just human. A year after the trial, I was living in a small apartment across town, had rebuilt my credit enough to get a secured card, had started dating again with a new set of trust issues that made everything complicated. I'd reconnected with old friends I'd neglected during my marriage, had thrown myself into work, had tried to build a new normal that didn't include constantly looking over my shoulder for the next betrayal. One Saturday morning, the first Saturday in over a year that I didn't feel visceral panic thinking about what day it was, I volunteered at the actual Riverside Animal Rescue. Deborah Kemp, the director who'd inadvertently revealed my wife's lies, remembered me. "I wondered if you'd ever come back here," she said gently. "I've thought about you a lot. Hoped you were okay." I told her I was working on it, and she put me to work cleaning kennels, the most straightforward, honest work I'd done in months. The dogs didn't care about my past, didn't judge me for being fooled, just wanted attention and treats and someone to throw a tennis ball. It was exactly what I needed. The woman I'd known as Lindsay sent me a letter from prison 6 months into her sentence. It was forwarded through my lawyer, who advised me not to read it, but I did anyway. She wrote that she was sorry, that she'd never meant for things to go so far, that her father had started teaching her the con game when she was a teenager, and by the time she'd met me, it was all she knew how to be. She claimed she'd really loved me, that the first 2 years had been genuine, that she'd tried to keep me separate from the crimes, but hadn't been able to resist the opportunities I'd represented. The letter felt like one more manipulation, one more performance, and I burned it after reading it once. Whether any of it was true didn't matter anymore. The woman I'd loved had never existed, and the woman who'd written that letter was a stranger I didn't owe anything to, least of all, forgiveness. 3 years after that Wednesday afternoon at the animal shelter, I'd built a new life that felt solid in ways my old life never had. I'd gotten a promotion at work, moved into a better apartment, started seriously dating someone new, Catherine, a librarian I'd met at a mutual friend's dinner party, who'd looked at me skeptically when I'd admitted my history, and then said, "Well, at least you learned something from it." Her pragmatism was refreshing after years of wondering if I'd ever trust anyone again. I still volunteered at the shelter most Saturdays, had become one of their regular handlers for difficult dogs that needed extra patience. Deborah told me I had a gift for it, that the animals could sense my calm energy. I didn't tell her it was because I'd learned to recognize manipulation, to sit with discomfort without reacting, to verify trust slowly over time instead of giving it away wholesale. The dogs and I understood each other. We'd both learned that not everyone who appears friendly actually has your best interests at heart. I never went back to that house in Riverside, but I drove past it once, a year after everything had ended. It had been sold to a new family, repainted yellow with a swing set in the backyard, transformed into someone else's innocent home. The mailbox no longer said Forrester. There was no trace of the parallel life that had been maintained there, the elaborate deception that had destroyed so many people's finances and faith. It was just a house again, neutral and normal, and I felt nothing looking at it except maybe a distant sense of closure. That chapter was over. The damage had been done, the justice had been served, and I'd survived. I'd never get back those 6 years, would never recover the money or the innocence or the easy trust I'd once had in people, but I'd gained something else. The knowledge that I could be broken completely and still find ways to put myself back together. Maybe not the same as before, but stronger in the places where I'd been fractured. The last time I thought about Lindsay, really thought about her, not just the shadow of her that flickered through my mind when trust became difficult, was on a Saturday morning at the shelter. I was introducing a shy pit bull mix to a potential adopter, watching the dog slowly warm up to this stranger, seeing trust build in careful increments when I realized I'd become like that dog. Cautious, but not broken. Hopeful, but not naive. Still capable of connection, just more deliberate about when and how I offered it. The adopter asked if the dog would ever fully trust him, and I said yes, probably, but it would take time and consistency and patience. Some scars, I told him. They don't fully heal. They just become part of who you are, and you learn to live with them. He adopted the dog anyway, and I watched them leave together, the man patient with the hesitant animal, both of them starting something new with full knowledge of the risks. That's what recovery looked like. Not forgetting, not even forgiving necessarily, but moving forward anyway, with your eyes open and your boundaries clear. I still can't walk past a dental office without feeling my stomach tighten. Still have moments where I doubt my judgment about people, where I wonder if I'm missing obvious red flags that everyone else can see. Catherine knows this, has sat through my moments of paranoia with patient understanding, has shown me her own financial records without me asking just to prove she has nothing to hide. Trust isn't something you give, she told me once. It's something you build, brick by brick, over time. And if someone asks you to trust them immediately and completely, that's usually a sign they're not worth trusting at all. She was right. The woman I'd known as Lindsay had built an elaborate facade of trustworthiness, the stable job, the volunteer work, the normal domestic life, specifically because she knew those were the things that would make me lower my guard. Real trust is quieter, slower, less performative. It's made of consistent small actions over time, not grand gestures and perfect stories. The story made national news for a while, one of those sensational cases that shows up in true crime documentaries and financial fraud podcasts. I declined most interview requests, participated in a few to help warn others about sophisticated family-based con operations. Agent Brennan told me that our case had helped them identify similar patterns in other investigations, that my willingness to come forward quickly had potentially prevented other people from being victimized. That helped, knowing something good had come from it. The dental office implemented new security protocols, started training staff on protecting patient information, made my disaster into a learning opportunity for the industry. The other victims, the 17 people Arthur and Lindsay had scammed before me, plus the 12 dental patients, formed an informal support group. We met occasionally, compared notes, shared our recovery strategies. Some of them were doing better than me, some worse. All of us carried the same fundamental wound, the knowledge that someone we'd trusted had deliberately, methodically betrayed us for money. You don't really recover from that so much as you learn to live beside it. 5 years after that Wednesday afternoon, I got a notification that Lindsay was up for parole. Her lawyer argued she'd been a model prisoner, had completed multiple rehabilitation programs, showed genuine remorse for her crimes. The parole board asked if I wanted to submit a statement or attend the hearing. I wrote a 2-page letter explaining the ongoing impact of her crimes on my life and the lives of her other victims, how the financial damage was only part of it, how the real cost was the destruction of our ability to trust ourselves and others. I didn't attend the hearing, didn't want to see her again, didn't want to give her any more of my time or energy or emotional labor. The parole board denied her petition. She'd serve at least another 3 years before she could apply again. I felt nothing when I got that news. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just a tired sort of acknowledgement that justice is slow and incomplete and never really fixes what was broken. Catherine and I got married that same year, a small ceremony with close friends and family, very different from the elaborate wedding I'd thought I'd had with Lindsay. This time I verified everything, checked Catherine's identity documents, ran a credit check with her permission, made sure every aspect of our union was legally legitimate and transparent. She found my thoroughness amusing rather than insulting, said it showed I'd learned something valuable, even if the lesson had been painful. I'd rather be with someone who's careful than someone who's careless, she said. Careful keeps us both safe. We bought a small house together, split everything 50-50, maintained separate accounts alongside our joint ones, built our life with clear boundaries and open communication. It wasn't romantic in the storybook sense, but it was real, and after years of living with an elaborate fiction, real was exactly what I needed. The animal shelter where I still volunteer every Saturday created a program for at-risk youth, teaching them animal care and responsibility, and I started helping with it. Working with teenagers who'd been through trauma, who'd learned early that adults weren't always trustworthy, felt like a natural extension of my own recovery. I told them my story sometimes, the age-appropriate version, when they asked why I was so focused on honesty and boundaries. People can seem perfect, and still be lying to you, I'd say. And that's not your fault, and it doesn't mean you should never trust anyone. It just means you should trust slowly. Watch what people do over time, and remember that real relationships can handle questions and verification. Anyone who gets angry when you want to protect yourself isn't someone you should trust anyway. Some of them listened, some didn't. But the ones who did told me later it had helped, had given them permission to be cautious without being closed off entirely. I ran into Deborah Kemp, the shelter director, at a fundraising event last spring. We'd become friends over the years, bonded by the strange circumstance of her being the person who'd accidentally revealed my wife's lies. I think about that day sometimes, she told me. When you came in with Thai food, and I had to tell you we didn't know your wife. I've always wondered if I should have handled it differently, been more gentle somehow. I told her she'd done exactly what she should have done. Told me the truth plainly and immediately, without softening it or second-guessing herself. If you'd been unclear, if you'd tried to spare my feelings, I might have convinced myself there was a misunderstanding, I said. You gave me the information I needed to protect myself, and everything that came after was on Lindsay, not on you. She seemed relieved to hear it. We talked about the youth program, about the new facility they were planning, about normal, honest things that had nothing to do with betrayal or fraud. It felt like healing. The last time Lindsay's name came up was 6 months ago, when Arthur Forrester died in prison from a heart attack. I got a notification because I was listed as a victim in the case. He'd served 8 years of his 23-year sentence, never showed remorse, never cooperated with authorities to help recover the stolen money. He died the way he'd lived, taking what wasn't his and giving nothing back. I wondered if Lindsay had been told, if she'd grieved for the father who'd taught her to see people as marks and love as a transaction. Then I stopped wondering, because it didn't matter. Her relationship with him, whatever it had been, was separate from what she'd done to me and the others. She'd made her choices as an adult, had continued making those choices even when she could have stopped. Her father's death didn't absolve her or change the impact of her crimes. I still have difficult Saturdays sometimes, days when I wake up and the weight of what happened settles over me like a fog, when I remember some specific moment from my marriage, her laughing at something I'd said, the way she'd curl up against me while watching TV, the plans we'd made for the future, and have to sit with the knowledge that none of it was what I'd thought it was. Catherine knows not to push on those days, just lets me be quiet, sits with me while I process things I'll probably be processing for the rest of my life. It's okay to still be angry, she told me once. It's okay to grieve for something that never actually existed. The loss is real, even if the relationship wasn't. She was right. I'd lost 6 years of my life, my financial security, my easy trust in people and in myself. That loss was legitimate even though the marriage had been a fraud, but I'd also gained things I wouldn't have otherwise. A more careful approach to relationships that actually served me better than my previous naive openness. A community of people at the shelter who knew my worst story and liked me anyway. A wife who valued transparency and honesty as much as I did, who understood that love without truth is just performance. A more realistic understanding of what people are capable of, for better and worse. I wasn't grateful for what Lindsay had done to me. Would never be grateful for that kind of betrayal. But I could acknowledge that I'd survived it and built something better from the wreckage. That was enough. It had to be. The house I live in now with Catherine has a welcome mat that says, "Come back with dogs." She bought it as a joke, knowing my history with the fake animal shelter story, but I found it perfect. Our life was simple and honest. We worked, we came home to each other, we volunteered at the shelter together on weekends. We built a quiet existence based on truth rather than performance. No secrets, no parallel lives, no hidden identities. Just two people who'd both been hurt in different ways, figuring out how to trust again without being reckless about it. That's what recovery looked like in the end. Not a return to innocence, but a movement toward wisdom. Not forgetting what happened, but refusing to let it define every moment going forward. I haven't thought about what I'd say if I ever saw Lindsay again after her release. Probably nothing. There's nothing left to say that matters. No explanation that would undo the damage or make sense of the senseless. She made her choices, I made mine, and we both live with the consequences. Mine include a careful, honest life with someone who values the same things I do. Hers include prison, a permanent criminal record, and the knowledge that she destroyed multiple lives, including her own, for money that's long gone. I won the long game not because I got revenge, I didn't, but because I learned to build something real from the ashes of something false. She's still trapped in the con, even behind bars, probably still seeing people as marks and relationships as transactions. I got out. That's the only victory that matters, and it's one I claim every Saturday morning when I show up at the shelter. Every night when I come home to a partner who tells me the truth. Every moment I choose connection, despite knowing exactly how badly it can go wrong. The story doesn't have a Hollywood ending. There was no dramatic confrontation, no moment where Lindsay broke down and confessed everything, no satisfying scene where I told her exactly what I thought of her. Real life isn't that neat. Justice came through courtrooms and paperwork, through the slow grinding machinery of the legal system, through the unglamorous work of rebuilding credit and trust over months and years. The satisfaction came not from her punishment, but from my survival, from the realization that she'd tried to destroy me and failed. I was still here, still capable of love and connection, still building a life worth living. She was the one trapped, locked in a cell of her own making, facing years more of consequences for choices she'd made freely and repeatedly. I'd escaped. That was enough. If you're reading this and you've been through something similar, if someone you trusted turned out to be someone else entirely, if the foundation of your life was revealed to be a fiction, I want you to know that you can survive it. It won't be easy, won't be quick, won't follow a predictable path. You'll have setbacks and difficult days and moments where you question everything about yourself. But you can come through it, can build something real on the other side, can learn to trust again without being naive about it. The key is accepting that some things can't be fixed or explained or resolved, they can just be survived. And survival, it turns out, is its own form of justice. You're still here. They didn't break you, not permanently. That matters more than any verdict or sentence ever could. Every Saturday morning, I wake up early and drive to the shelter. I walk past the front desk, where Deborah first told me the truth, past the kennels where anxious dogs wait for someone to see them, to the intake area where I help process new arrivals. I work with animals that have been abandoned, abused, betrayed by the humans they trusted, and I teach them that not everyone is like that some people can be counted on, that trust is possible even after trauma. And in teaching them, I remind myself of the same truths. We're all just trying to figure out how to hope again after learning exactly how badly hope can fail. The difference is, I'm choosing to hope anyway, choosing to believe that most people are decent, choosing to build relationships based on truth, even though I know how easily truth can be faked. That choice, to remain open despite knowing the risks, is the real victory. It's the only victory that ever really mattered. Lindsay took 6 years of my life, $36,000, and my easy trust in people. She couldn't take my capacity for connection, my ability to learn and grow, my willingness to try again. In the end, that's what separates victims from survivors. Survivors keep trying. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.